is not practical or prudent for this committee to meet in person. To ensure a transplanted and open meeting as possible, we will post the meeting materials approximately 1 week in advance. We'll provide a recording of this meeting linked to our website, and we'll take all votes by roll call. Before beginning, I would like to make a few logistical announcements. The meeting is being recorded. Please use the mute function when not speaking. This will help us eliminate excessive background noise. Those on the phone can press *6 to mute and unmute themselves. Members of the public, if you have a question during the meeting, please use the chat box. Staff will be monitoring it. Additionally, if you wish to address the committee during the public comment agenda item, you can indicate your desire to do so in that chat box. Lastly, members of the committee, when making a motion, please include your name so staff can properly record it. This concludes the meeting announcements. Thank you. All right, moving in to item number 2, which is approval of the minutes. I will now entertain a motion to approve the minutes of the April 19th, 2022 meeting. Please remember to unmute yourself and state your name prior to making a motion. Do I have a motion?
Mike Einhorn Creek, so moves.
Mayor Rockingham, second.
Okay, we have a motion and second. Any further discussion? Motion is moved and seconded. Are there any questions in the chat box or from the phones? I guess not.
No, there are none.
Mary will now lead us in a roll call vote.
President Lungmiss,
Present.
Mary, if I may step in for a second, we should also treat this as the roll call for attendance for the meeting as well.
Okay.
thank you, Jared. Okay, so starting from the top again, President Lungmiss,
Present.
Mayor Van Duzen, President Darch,
Present and yes.
President Hayes,
Here and yes.
President Sherwin,
Here, yes.
thank you. Mayor Tamburino, President DeCipio, President Gallagher,
Yes.
President Brady,
Back when you're done.
Okay.
President Warner,
Yes, and yes.
thank you. President Einhorn,
Yes and yes.
Mayor Kolash,
Yes and yes.
President Austin, Mayor Grasso,
President, yes.
Mayor Shelkey,
Present and yes.
President Skillman,
Yes and yes.
Mayor Rockingham,
Here, aye.
President Rybeck,
Here and I.
Yeah.
President Mack,
Yeah, it's a different angle on diversity. I think a couple people.
Jane, you're not muted.
I'll talk to you later.
Have you completed the roll call?
we've got a few more people, I apologize.
Okay.
President Mack, Mayor Brent,
Present and yes.
thank you. President Ogle, and Mayor Kurtz. Okay, that concludes the roll call.
Very good. From what I could count, we have the necessary members for the meeting and they approved the minutes, so. Okay, moving to item 3, which is the new business under CMAP update. Aaron Allman, are you with us?
I am. Good morning, Mayor Schilke. How are you?
Good.
Good. A couple items that I wanted to share with this group this morning. The first related to some of the work that we've been doing related to the competitive grants that are coming through the infrastructure bill. So we've been working pretty closely with our delegation to ensure that our region is taking full advantage of the new opportunities in the infrastructure bill. We have heard, and I was in DC last week from our congressional leaders, that the only way for our region to reap the benefits of these additional funds that aren't core just coming to this region, but the ones that are competitive, is that if we work together, prioritizing projects, building consensus. And I'll share, to light a little bit of fire under all of us, or at least I felt some fire under me, is that when I was in DC last week, a number of our peer regions across the country are already developing consensus lists for major projects that we have. We do have regionally significant projects listed in our 2050 plan, but some of the MPOs across the country are putting together booklets of consensus lists and recommended projects for specific IIJA grant opportunities, and they've been able to bring those papers and hand them directly to, the Deputy Secretary of USDOT who we were visiting with. So we have been convening our major infrastructure partners on a monthly basis so that we can get to the point of having a similar document that we can then be talking about our priority projects, whether it's freight rail related projects, whether it's, some of the bigger infrastructure projects that this region has had on the books for quite some time. That's what we want to get to. And I know that you all know that just given our status as the hub of freight rail across the country, we will be competitive if we work together for these next calls for projects, and they'll be happening annually. So annually, there'll be a mega call for projects, which is the reframed Tiger Grant, I believe, or RAISE grants. Infra freight projects, again, another great opportunity for us to be highlighting our CREATE program, but also some of the work that we've been doing around grade separations throughout the 7-county region here. So right now in the hopper, things that are at USDOT looking at going through an evaluation process, our IDOT and CTA's joint 290 multimodal corridor project. The reconstruction of the entire corridor has been on our books for quite some time, as well as the coordination of that with the Blue Line as well. And upgrading the station and accessibility there, and thinking about that project, how it meets the administration's goals of resiliency, of equity, of also just sort of modernizing and making sure there are multimodal options along that corridor. So we do believe that's a competitive project, but we have to continue to talk about why that's a priority for our region and our region's communities. Amtrak's Union Station project has also been submitted. So a Chicago Access project is what they're calling it. It really helps to better connect people from across the Midwest into Union Station, connects to college campuses across the country, but also there's some great connections that can be made here to our major facilities that we have, whether it's McCormick Place, whether it's thinking about how folks get into Chicago and then back out to O'Hare. There are a lot of great elements of that project, and we think that project will also be competitive given this administration's interest in intracity passenger rail and trains. And then lastly, CREATE programs, Ogden Junction project, again, another one of the projects in the CREATE program that untangles the freight and passenger rail. So those are the three biggest multimodal coordinated projects that we think will be most competitive coming through in this first round of applications. But we don't anticipate this to stop. We know that there are opportunities for more projects to continue to move forward, and we want to make sure that we aren't doing what we've seen previously, is that the last time there was a grant application available for the RAISE program, this region put forth 33 projects and none were selected. So we're want to make sure that we're coordinated ourselves, that we're thinking about the timing, we're being strategic about what phase of what project in what places, but that also we're thinking about sort of the regional significance and making sure that all of our communities are benefiting from these projects and these applications. So again, we've had some conversations with Durbin's office, with Representative Garcia, and all of our delegation about these priorities, and we want to continue to engage you and make sure that your Council of Mayors, your transportation folks, also as we get down into the weeds. We've started with the big projects that are available in programs, but as we get down into the weeds, we think that there are opportunities to get a little bit of feedback. If I could ask folks to mute themselves if they're not talking, please. But that we're thinking about sort of the scale and scope of projects, because there are going to be lots of smaller scale opportunities that will help support community projects as well. Maybe I'll ask if my team might mute whoever seems to be unmuted. Be appreciated. Thank you very much. Okay, so let's see, our goal again is to bring these implementers together over the coming months, continue to have them meet, discuss, think about coordination, thinking about sort of that higher order and how we can bring those projects to our delegation. We'll keep you informed. We're happy to have continued conversations about what makes sense. We want to make sure too that we're a guide for your communities. A lot of these federal applications have very stringent requirements and are complex, and so we know a lot of the dollars are also flowing through the state as well. So thinking about, what's an appropriate project for the federal dollars, what's an appropriate project for the funds that will be coming through state competitive opportunities, and helping guide you and your teams in that manner. Two other things that I wanted to touch on here this morning are, one of the other things that the infrastructure bill did was increase planning funds to regions across the country like ours. So as we've gone through and looked at the math for that for our region, we are going to be required to do a number of new things, including create a regional resiliency plan, looking at electric vehicle charging planning for the region. But it also means that we were given additional resources to do that. The way that we pay for our funds here are through local contributions. And so many of our communities all receive annual contribution letters. We will be increasing local contributions by 20% this next year. My team is going out and talking to the Council of Mayors across the region, to your transportation technical committees across the region, to talk a little bit about what this means, the services we provide, and the value that we have in supporting your communities and developing plans and programming transportation funds across this region. Without CMAP here, we are sort of the interim step to unlocking federal dollars to local infrastructure projects across the region. So with the increase in the infrastructure bill, we typically see about $120 million annually prior to this bill's passage in STP local funds for this region. After the passage of the bill, there's over $200 million available throughout the region that we program here in coordination with your Council of Mayors here. Again, just thinking a little bit about what else that provides for you. The funding for the 11 planning liaisons that do work on behalf of our councils are all funded through these federal funds that come through. The foundational data and transportation analysis that we do when you're looking at small area traffic forecasts, when your consultant engineers are looking at the impacts of improving roadways across the region. Our team does the data analytics behind that, and oftentimes are in coordination with your teams on those things as well. Like I mentioned, we'll be doing a regional resiliency plan. We will be doing ADA planning across the region, valued at about $1 million a year to help our communities get into compliance. Again, we've been working on the data and information that we'll need for that, and then we'll be contracting with consultants to help support our communities develop ADA planning resources and training in this coming year, and anticipate that that's going to happen for the next decade. Pavement management plans. We're doing safe and complete streets planning, which again will get your communities prepared to receive or be competitive for additional federal funds that will be coming. Carbon reduction plans. I mentioned the EV planning, and we're doing a regional transportation vulnerability assessment as well, which will help unlock additional federal resources for this region. So again, I'm happy to answer questions about our local contributions increase here, or you can reach out to me or my team. I know that they've gone to a couple of Council of Mayors, including Lake and DuPage, to their transportation technical committees, but we've got more presentations coming up. And then the last thing that I wanted to mention with you all here too is that on your agenda today, you'll receive an update on research that is really helping us better understand how travel preferences have changed post-COVID and business decisions, as well as individual personal household decisions. This work is really going to help roll into a legislative mandate that CMAP has been given to work closely with RTA to determine how we should pay for transit funding across the region. We're seeing some stark fiscal implications. The federal government has staved off the most severe cuts for our transit service, but know that this is foundational work that I think will help lead us to a better understanding of what we might need to do to modernize policies, programs, funding initiatives to make sure that our transit partners are stable into the future, and just wanted to highlight that for you. So with that, I'm happy to answer questions. Oh, and Mayor Schulte talking. Oh, there we go.
Yeah, do we have anybody on the committee that has any questions for Erin? She's covered a wide variety of material this morning. You know, the politician in me begs to ask you, you know, when you go to Washington and you're talking about, all kind of that, how this money is going to be distributed and chosen and selected, is there anybody by name that we should maybe be focusing our letters or our comments to? Is there anybody, is it our US senators or a congressman or two, or who from the Illinois delegation are kind of the movers and shakers in this money distribution thing?
Well, we've been trying to engage all of them and their teams. I will say that, the senators from our region, Durban and Duckworth, are well aware of our regional priorities and our needs for infrastructures. I'll say when we get to the House of Representatives side, we're doing what we can to make sure that their teams understand a little bit more about transportation. Some of their teams are newer, and the committees that the congressional representatives represent might not always be transportation. So we've been trying to work on making sure that they understand the intersection between where your housing is and the fact that the transportation system provides that access from your home to your job, or from your home to your park or your doctor's office. So I would say, really looking at your House of Representatives members and engaging with them so that we can help build their capacity and understanding as they talk to USDOT and others. We've been working with the transportation implementers to put together a booklet of a program of projects. So once we have that too, we'll be able to share that with you all so that as you have opportunities to talk to your representatives, you can have something in hand to give them that talks about the region's infrastructure projects that are necessary.
I would just make the observation that, as all of us know, I believe Illinois lost one congressional seat through the census this past time. And that then allowed for a major, I'll call it, shakeup of the boundaries of congressional representation throughout the region. And many of us on this call, I think, are probably sitting here with brand new congressmen that maybe we don't know that well, but who have just been kind of reconfigured or gerrymandered, or whatever description you want to put on it, into new districts. And in my case in Batavia, I've got totally new congressmen. The ones I had before are still around, but they're downstate or they're different locations. So there's been a major shift of, who your congressman is, and maybe you had a good relationship with the last one, but now you don't really know the new one yet too well. So there's a lot of, when we're talking about trying to grab, or not you grab, but solicit money for ourselves, I don't know if I think we're in the very strongest position maybe that we were previously, because there's a lot of us that don't know the congressman as well as we did previously, but thanks to the remapping that's been done here. So it's a kind of a moment of unknown political future here, I think, to some degree, as to how the Chicago area is going to shake out with all this new map drawing that's taken place. Anybody else have any observations or comments they want to make? All right. Thank you, Erin, for that insight. Next, we'll move to 3.2, which is the STP Project Selection Committee update. Kama Dobbs, are you on?
I am here. Good morning, Mayor Shelkey, and thank you. Good morning, everyone. The STP Project Selection Committee last met on June 23rd. At that meeting, staff provided an update on the status of research that's being conducted to develop a recommendation regarding inclusion of commuter rail yard expansions as an eligible project type. Although the committee is somewhat hesitant to dilute the shared fund by adding, additional eligibilities, the committee did encourage staff to continue their research, and we are doing that, and we'll discuss these project types again at the committee's next meeting on August 11th. Proposed language changes to continue to clarify the definition of substantially complete with regards to the requirement for phase 1 preliminary engineering to be substantially complete was also presented. This language was also presented to and discussed by the CMAQ and TAP Project Selection Committee on that same day. Based on the discussion at both committees, staff is considering some additional refinements to that language. Next at the committee meeting, staff proposed replacing the current green infrastructure planning factor with a resilience planning factor. This factor is focused on the inclusion of both gray infrastructure elements that exceed design standards, as well as the previously eligible green infrastructure elements that would allow the transportation system to withstand and prepare for disruptions and to be better able to remain in service during and after weather events or natural disasters. Finally, staff sought committee input on potential safety focus areas to supplement the existing safety project categories need scoring. The committee's next meeting is scheduled for Thursday, August 11th at 9:30 a.m. And as of right now, that meeting is planned to be held virtually. Shifting for a minute to project implementation, I am pleased to report that the obligation of STP and CRISA funds is continuing, though a little bit slowly. Through June, about $8.5 million was obligated for STP shared fund projects, and over $49 million has been obligated for local STP projects in federal fiscal year 2022. This is just under 24% of the funding that's available to the region for this federal fiscal year. Thus far, 17% of the region's CRISA, or the COVID relief funding, has also been obligated. There are many projects in the region that are just shy of making their lettings or obligations for this federal fiscal year, and the vast majority of those will be extended into federal fiscal year 2023. So that concludes my formal report this morning, but I'm happy to take questions about the STP or CRISA programs or activities of the Project Selection Committee.
Very nice. They were nice people. Yeah. Okay, so moving forward, the food's been amazing and the service that we're giving the guests is top notch, but we maybe have problems behind.
Mayor Schuelke.
Yeah, we're having some muting issues here.
Yeah, we're working on them.
Okay.
Emma, can I ask just one clarification here? So I just wanted to make sure I heard you right, that we're spending at about 25%, and the federal fiscal year ends September 30th. Is that correct? And we're more than halfway through the fiscal year?
That is correct. So we're a little bit behind where we should be. We do have several large projects that have had some hiccups with right away. Again, just kind of lingering issues from courts being closed due to COVID. So another oddity this year is that federal authorization for the November letting won't happen until the next federal fiscal year. So sometimes it happens in the current year, sometimes it happens in the next year. So, those projects look like they're not going to make FY22, but they'll be on that next letting, the first letting of 23.
Again, do we have any questions for Kama today?
Who's Jeff? Who's the czar of timeframes? Is that the feds? I mean, because you wonder when they set up these timeframe requirements to the people that make the rules, do they even have a concept of what it takes to put a project together with all the stipulations that they throw on these things? I mean, are they even dialed into reality?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things, Mayor Einhorn. The federal fiscal year is what it is. The state fiscal year is what it is. We try and set the deadlines to correspond with the state letting schedule. As you know, most of the federally funded, locally sponsored projects in the region go through that state lettings rather than local lettings.
I wasn't really talking about us so much as I was the federal folks. It just seems to me that they pass stuff and they have no concept of once it gets signed off on and passed, it just evaporates into thin air, and until they figure out that the money isn't being spent at the rate that they expected, and then have no idea why.
Yeah, I think perhaps that when Congress enacts things, they definitely don't account for the time it takes for guidance to be issued, procedures to be put in place, and everything else. It is worth noting that the vast majority of federal funds, from a congressional appropriation standpoint, do have the current year plus 3 years in order to be obligated. Now, that doesn't include use of advanced construction and some of those, more creative cash management techniques that are used here in this state. But, there is some time, but no, I mean, you don't get projects on the ground 2 months after Congress acts to appropriate funding. That's for sure.
Kama, Mayor Kearns has a question. She said at recent meetings, IDOT said bid lettings are coming in approximately 40% over engineers' estimates. What are you finding and how is that being handled?
So we are seeing estimates that are both over and under pre-bid estimates. I think in most cases, either the local council or the shared fund is able to accommodate most of those cost increases. And I know we've got both Russell Petroviak from CMAP on the line, as well as Chad Riddle. I know Russell tracks those letting amounts more than I do, so I don't know, Russell, if you wanted to add anything.
I think let's let Chad give his report and hear from IDOT first, then we can add to that if that doesn't answer the question.
Well, the other problem with that is that it bumps up the sponsoring agencies' contribution. You know, if you're at 20% and 20% was this last year, 20% is going to be way different this year because of the increased cost. And then what happens when the agency doesn't have the additional money? You know, I realize we're in crazy times, but to me, it seems like we need to drop a marker in the sand at some point, and if things go crazy like they're happening now, we go to the shared fund, and it's almost like an automatic that you're going to get additional dollars, so the local agency doesn't have to come out of pocket anymore. I got that problem right now on a road that I'm going to be upside down on because it's meeting all the requirements, taking so long to get the job done that prices increase and my revenue doesn't increase to be able to make the 20% match.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, there's the 20% match requirement is a federal requirement, so we can't match federal funds with another source of federal funds. You can match federal funds with state funds, so I don't know if there's an opportunity for partnership there. Unfortunately, prices just are going up across the board, and as each bid comes in, I think each sponsor is going to have to make their decision bid by bid on whether to accept or take a chance that prices will continue to rise or hopefully come back down.
Is this the proper time to talk about cohort issues?
Certainly.
Well, I have told this to a couple different people. I personally have got a real issue with the cohort mentality because with no skin in the game, I worry about consultants running the bill up because there's no skin off the nose of the municipalities they're working for, and they can charge basically whatever they want. There's no controls over that because the municipality is not paying any money. And I think that just fundamentally is wrong. And Cam, you and I have talked about that already. And I guess this is a good time as any to bring it up. I just don't think that a blank check is the way to operate in this day and age. It just is. I like to say that I trust everybody, but quite frankly, I don't trust anybody.
Yeah, I think, your comments are understood, and maybe to bring everybody up to speed, or as a reminder, CMAP uses a set of community cohorts, and our policies allow those municipalities which are seen as the highest need that qualify as cohort 4 to use toll credits in lieu of local match to go up to 100% federal funding. So that's what Mayor Einhorn is speaking about when he's talking about folks basically get a blank check and have no skin in the game. I think that it's certainly a conversation that can be had at the project selection committee level. The ability to utilize toll credits was a decision made by that committee supported by the Transportation Committee and the MPO Policy Committee. You know, the individual councils, on the other hand, do have a choice. They don't have to go up to that 100% for cohort 4. I think McHenry County is one council that actually goes up to 90% federal and 10% local, rather than going up to 100%. So, you know, individual councils can make that decision. There is at least one council, I think 2, that actually don't utilize any toll credits, even though they do have some communities that would be eligible under the regional policy. So, you know, happy to bring that conversation back to the STP Project Selection Committee if that's something that all of you are interested in.
Well, I think those are very timely comments that Mayor Einhorn has just made. I know several other councils, including some situations I've dealt with, where those things have a tendency to kind of raise their ugly head and get involved. And so I think that's a point of conversation that we need to continue to have here. And if things go really wacky, that we really probably at our future meetings should begin to talk more understandingly, let's say, about it as far as what we can and cannot do and how we do it, because that really does potentially cause some disruption in funding and the flow of funding going into the area, and allowing some people to come in and take the advantages that have been outlined by Mayor Einhorn, certainly, I think, put us all at a disadvantage. So it's good that this gets out and everybody knows what the game is being played. So I appreciate the conversation here today, because it is in the background here and we need to keep our eye on it. Okay, anybody else have any comments or questions for Kama? Well, thank you for your good efforts this morning, Kama. Okay, next we'll move to 3.3, which is IDOT Bureau of Local Roads update. Chad Riddle, or Chad, are you with us?
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Okay, just good morning, everybody. And after the last conversation, I'm afraid to do any talking, but I will do the best I can here. Business as usual here at IDOT. We're still working remote, and we're going to continue that, I think, in the near future. We're doing a pilot program, so we've been very productive. Letting wise, as Kama has summarized, that we've been slow. June was big at 17. August is a lull. We only have 3. But September, we're looking at, you know, a good 10 or 12. And then November right now is over 20. So again, we hit a lull now because things can't be done this year. We're getting a winter letting, so things can be started on the ground next spring. So hopefully a lot of those will move ahead. And as said, a lot of those are dependent upon right-of-way clearing. Other than that, I'll take any questions related to our processing for the SDP funds and all that kind of stuff. A couple notes I want to say is the ITEP cycle 15, we're up to 15 already, is going to be out on the street August 1st with applications due, I think, by September 30th. And I think this is a big program from the state side, 125 million. They've increased the cap to 3 million. And I'm assuming most staff or whatever did receive, there was an email sent out yesterday or the day before that talks about there's 3 webinars for the ITEP program introduction. So I want to just highlight that only because the first one is actually tomorrow. And it's basically a, you know, what to expect, how to anticipate an application and that kind of stuff. So I'm assuming the PLs might blast that out to their local agencies and everything in case they want to get a jump start on this, but the application won't really start until August 1st, but the webinar is tomorrow, and then 2 others following that up. Other than that, I just have one statement, and I'd like to, I might need a little help. We're getting inquiries through our executives, through, you know, from reps and mayors and senators to our secretary, to our regional engineer, because local agencies are complaining to us that they've had funds rescinded from them, you know, through sunset clauses, whether it be through CMAP, through the Council of Mayors and all that kind of stuff. So, and they're asking, you know, me to provide answers about why this is happening. So I may be reaching out to help from somebody. And again, you know, this is something we only control the funds that you provide to us. If funds are given or taken away, that is fully based on, I assume, the CMAP and council policies. Specifically, one I'm going to be looking into to prepare for this Kane County is Geneva with their 2.5 million STPL that they took away, that they're asking us why. So again, I did, that's just a heads up. And again, I think we try to work very well on these projects. If there are delays because of right-of-way condemnation and stuff, that we, if a project's active, we hope the funds will still be there if there's justification that why it's delayed. It's not just a local agency waited 3 years to even initiate it. So again, but that's my little part of rambling. And like I say, other than that, we're working hard, and as these new fund sources come available and these new programs get awarded, we're going to be busier than ever. And hopefully, we can keep everything moving ahead as fast as we can. And again, make sure everybody works with us to have logical, feasible schedules, not, be optimistic. We've gotten local agencies that get funds and want to let a project the next month, and that's not going to happen. So we just want some reality to be shared both amongst the councils as well as their local agencies and their consultants. So any questions? I'm done rambling.
Just a comment, Chad. The turnaround time for reviews seems like it's been going down, which is a good thing, and pat on the back for that.
Thank you. I mean, again, and it's constantly, workload does control some of that, as well as some, priority projects and that kind of stuff, and again, we do apologize when it comes to agreements. Usually construction has priority over preliminary engineering because construction has deadlines. But again, I know our phase 1 staff is trying to get things turned around, and we're getting better cooperation from the district, other bureaus, as well as some central office bureaus too. So thank you, Mayor.
Any other questions for Mr. Einhorn?
Okay.
Chad, I just want to say that I want to second what Mayor Einhorn just said, that, you guys do make an effort to try to work with us, and I really do appreciate it. I've had several other mayors tell me about some support that they found at IDOT that helped them get over a hurdle or two. And as Mayor Einhorn has just indicated, I think that's a good point to be brought up here, because IDOT does seem to be working very well now. And I can remember other times in my rather lengthy career in this world of being a mayor, that wasn't always the case. And sometimes we would get stalled out, and basically, you died on the road there because you couldn't get anything finalized and approved. But you're moving things through, and I appreciate the effort being made by IDOT to get that along. And I'm pleased that Mayor Einhorn brought this up coming from the southern part of the region, and I'm from the western part of the region. So I guess, and some of the other mayors on here are from other parts of the region, it's nice that we can see stuff that IDOT's doing that is positive in our behalf. So thank you for that.
Well, again, I just want to say I appreciate that, because again, I hear that, pretty often at these meetings, and maybe that's one of the reasons I like to join them. But when it comes through, the documentations that come from, the secretary's office and through our upstairs office, it's good news is no news. So it's only when there's complaints that they come through some of the people above me. So it's nice to hear that, there are still good things happening out there.
Right. Okay. All right, thank you for that, Chad. Moving then to item 3.4 on our agenda is the update of CMAP's mobility. And we have our mobility recovery, and Daniel Comex is going to do that. Dan, are you on the call?
I am. Thank you, Mayor Schuelke. Thank you all. So as the Mayor said, my name is Daniel Como. I am a senior policy analyst here at CMAP, and I have been project managing an effort that we call mobility recovery, which is our attempts to try to understand, what are the changes that have happened in the region due to COVID-19, and how has that specifically impacted the region's mobility system, and what do we need to do in response to those changes. So I'm going to walk you through, a little bit of what we found in our analysis and our work over the last 18 months, and then go through some of our potential recommendations and have some time for discussion to get your input and your reactions to these. So if you could go to the next slide, please. So this project started in roughly July of 2020, when we all realized that COVID was not going to quickly go away, and that there would be some durable and long-term shifts coming out of the pandemic. And so since then, and really since formally kicking off in January of 2021, we have been trying to grapple with, what are those changes that are going to emerge out of the pandemic that already have emerged, and how do we need to respond as a region, over the next 5 to 10 years, so that we can continue to make progress toward the goals of Launch 2050, the sorts of things that we still think are the right goals for the region, but in an environment that looks a little bit different than it did when we adopted the plan in 2018. And so to do this work, we've engaged in a number of steps with some consulting support. We've done policy research in terms of what's going on in other regions in the US and globally. We've done stakeholder engagement and community engagement throughout the region. We've looked at what we can already see in terms of changes to housing and employment and travel patterns in the region. And then we've also taken different versions of the future and run them through CMAP's travel models to try to understand what could happen if different patterns play out. And we're now at the point in the project where, with all of that together, we're able to start to understand the financial implications of some of these shifts, especially for the region's transit system, and then to identify what are appropriate strategies that the various public-private actors in the region could pursue in response to the shifts that we're seeing. If you go to the next slide, just to highlight, this work has been done in consultation with a large regional steering committee. I'd in particular like to thank Mayor Schulke and President Brady and their staffs as they've sat on the steering committee of this work, along with President Brawley and Mayor Irvin. But we also have engagement from counties throughout the region, from the transit service providers, from nonprofits and civic organizations. And so we have a real wide range of stakeholders that we've been consulting and that we're going to continue to be working with over the remainder of this work and, of course, into the future. So if you go to the next slide, I'm just going to recap a few things that we have learned through this work so far. If anyone does have questions about these slides, also happy to pause and explain some things. But the biggest thing that we have really been trying to grapple with, that I'm sure many of your communities are also grappling with, is the real, and we think durable shift in remote or telework, remote work, hybrid work, that before COVID-19, on an average weekday, we might have expected somewhere in the range of 6 to 8% of regional employees would be working remotely. And that's, that's a large number of employees, it's hundreds of thousands of people, but it was still, less than 10% of the region's workforce. And it was not, the determining factor in overall commute patterns. Our best estimate right now is that after COVID-19, the stable level of remote work is something that's double or triple that previous baseline. And so that's something more in the range of up to about a quarter of regional employees working remotely on an average weekday. And so that doesn't look the same in every community throughout the region. On the right side of this slide, we've highlighted in dark blue the places where the jobs are that have the greatest likelihood of being done remotely. And so, some places like downtown Chicago might, be obvious candidates for this, but we also see these clusters of high levels of remote work in communities throughout the region. North Cook has, very large clusters, Southern Lake, all throughout DuPage County, and then individual clusters, throughout the rest of the region. And these are places where fewer people will be traveling to and from work on a daily basis. Whenever we talk about an average weekday, something to keep in mind here is that some days, like Fridays, might have lower levels of in-person work versus, today. I noticed my train to work was quite busy. And so that is a dynamic that we're also trying to grapple with. But on the whole, we do expect there to be much higher levels of remote work after COVID than we had before. But if you go to the next slide, just because we have more remote work doesn't mean that we don't have to continue to plan for all of the other trips that happen in the region. Most people will still be working in person most of the time. And of course, all of us take trips for a variety of reasons unrelated to work. And so as we're thinking about what our travel system is going to be doing coming out of the pandemic, something that we are trying to keep in mind is who is traveling and for what reason. And during the pandemic, we saw that the people that were traveling, the essential workers, tended to disproportionately come from lower income and minority communities within our region. We expect that that dynamic is going to continue to be the case in access to jobs that have the ability to telework. And so that's going to be something that we're closely watching because we do want to make sure that even in a system where travel demands have changed, we continue to provide, robust, reliable mobility options for everyone who need them in the region. If you go to the next slide, yes. So, and one part of that, and we do think is really important to highlight, is that part of having that robust system is having a robust transit system in the region. That even in a region where we see potentially lower levels of weekday rush hour commutes, our transit system is still critical to achieving all of the goals that we have committed to as a region in terms of economic growth and inclusive growth, our advancement of environmental sustainability, achieving our goals in terms of things like equity. That investments in transit are investments in those goals, and that without our regional transit system and thinking about all of its various components, it's not just CTA, but thinking about Metra and PACE, that having that robust and truly regional and comprehensive and coordinated system is going to be a critical component to our broader regional recovery. So that brings us to where we are now in the project, which is what do we need to do? We have gone through a long list of ideas, and if you go to the next slide, we'll sort of walk through how we got here. As part of this work, we've taken the laundry list of ideas that are in ONTO 2050, that are in our policy benchmarking and our research, the ideas that we got from talking to stakeholders throughout the region, like many of you, and analysis of different potential scenarios. And we're now trying to winnow that down to a shorter list of about 5 to 10 strategies that we can get regional consensus and agreement on. We know that by this fall, which is the conclusion of this phase of the work, we're not going to have everything solved, but we are hoping to have greater consensus and clarity on a few policy ideas that we think are sufficient to meet the moment that we're facing. And so with that list in hand, we're then going to be looking forward to future work. As Aaron mentioned up at the top of the meeting, one aspect of this is going to be the development of a report to the Illinois General Assembly on reforms to transit funding and overall transit system policies and procedures to ensure that the system remains financially sustainable and continues to provide the service that our region has come to rely on. But we'll also be thinking about other steps across the range of policy ideas that we're considering, not just transit, but thinking about, for example, things like freight and e-commerce, and what sorts of steps we or our partners could take to execute on these ideas, as well as what sorts of legislative changes we might need to pursue either at the state or the federal level to enable their forward progress. And if you go to the next slide, as we've thought about these different ideas, and as we're trying to get to a portfolio that is more in the 5 to 10 ideas range, we're trying to make sure that it collectively responds to a range of criteria. And so things like equity and environmental sustainability, applicability to our region's diversity of places from the most urban to the most rural, responding to concerns about safety and ensuring that we're doing things in ways that are supportive of transit. We're also thinking about the more logistical side of these recommendations. So the scale, if they're sufficient to the moment, the time it will take to implement. Some of these things are much longer in terms of their lead time than others. And then the feasibility, both operationally and politically, and of course, what it might cost. Because, well, some of these things can be done for little or no cost. Some of them could be quite expensive. And so we're very aware of that and trying to think about how we balance all of these factors into a portfolio that collectively meets them. So what I'm going to do now is to walk through sort of a high-level version of the recommendations. This is still very much a draft. We are interested in your input and your feedback. We are going to continue to refine these over the coming months, but I'm going to talk about them sort of in response to the change that they are most related to. And I'll give some of the detail that underlies each of them. If you do have additional questions, we're happy to pause and to have a discussion about any particular component. The first set of recommendations really relates to transit, and it's in response to a few things that we've seen. The most notable of which is that transit ridership is still well below its pre-COVID baseline, and so these numbers, I believe, go through June of this year. And you'll see that while the transit system has recovered from the lowest levels of the early days of the pandemic, it is still well below that 2019 baseline. But there are differences across the modes. And so bus service, both on CTA and PACE, has performed relatively better in terms of its ridership, while services like Metra have had relatively lower return to ridership. All of them have seen increases since the beginning of the pandemic, and they have seen gradual regrowth with the Omicron dip in January that you may notice. But in general, this is the system that we're facing, and other travel has resumed to a much greater degree. And so we haven't seen congestion get quite back to the levels that it was before COVID, but it is certainly returned as a major factor in the region. We've seen truck traffic actually increase in some contexts. Transit ridership has not recovered to the same degree. And since so much of our region's transit system budget historically came from fare revenue, this means that the system faces a pretty significant financial shortfall when federal aid is anticipated to be exhausted later this decade. So if we can go to the next slide, what we're thinking about in response to that shift is that we need to think about how to close a financial shortfall for the system, which is in the high hundreds of millions of dollars annually, is the current best estimate, something in the range of $700 million. And that's on an annual basis. And so we're thinking about how we close that. As we're thinking about that, we also are thinking about what sorts of improvements and investments in the system we would need to make to be able to really say, if we're investing this much money in the system, what is it that we can expect? And so we've identified a couple of areas that we think are worth special attention. One of them is continuing our recent successes in terms of reforms toward a more integrated and affordable transit system. Over the last 2 years, we've seen the transit service boards experimenting with new pass structures and creating new monthly, full region transit passes. The Regional Connect Pass is what that is now called. We think there are opportunities to build on that and to think about how we continue to make the system even more seamless so that people can transfer between Metra and CTA, with a discounted cost and more, easily achievable as a regular user, but also thinking about how the transit system could allow for better integration with things like bike share. So the Divvy system in the city of Chicago being one example, and also thinking about how we can continue to better integrate our region's many dial-a-ride systems as another complement to our traditional fixed route system. And as we're thinking about that, also thinking about the affordability and whether there are opportunities to ensure that low-income travelers have more affordable fares. Our second area of improvements that we want to highlight is thinking about bus service. And this is, again, because during the pandemic and today, we see bus ridership being relatively higher than other modes. And we think that there are some investments that we can make to quickly and relatively cheaply make our region's bus systems, both PACE and CTA, faster and more reliable, thinking about dedicated rights of way and bus priority investments, both for things like PACE Pulse, and for CTA bus routes, and thinking about how we get that done more quickly and in ways that can work and that can actually be implementable and enforceable. But as we're thinking about both of those as system improvements, we also think it's important to be upfront and explicit about the fact that we're going to need to identify new revenues to support our region's transit system. We're not going to be able to cut our way out of this financial shortfall. And so we are beginning conversations with regional stakeholders about potential sources of revenue. Some that we have discussed that we think could be worth further exploration are to broaden the state sales tax base to cover additional services. That would obviously have more implications than just for the transit service boards, but it is one component, with the RTA sales tax that would lead to additional revenue for the transit service boards. And we're also talking about how we could think about revenues from other parts of the transportation system going into support transit. And especially if we were to think about pursuing new tolling or managed lanes on our region's untolled expressways, or having the regional conversation that we've already started about the eventual migration from a motor fuel tax toward a mileage-based road usage charge. These are things that we think we could build in from the start, some dedicated funding for transit, especially for transit that provides alternatives on those same corridors. And so none of those are easy things to do, but we do think it's important to start talking about them because, as I said, we have a very large shortfall that we expect to start being a real issue in the end of 2025, the beginning of 2026, and that's the fiscal cliff that we are working against. So we do have time, but it is an approaching challenge that we want the region to begin to really start talking about how we're going to address it. So I'll pause here, and then I'm happy to walk through the rest of the recommendations, but that's what we have on the transit front. Happy to talk about any questions or thoughts here if you have them.
Do we have any comments or questions or review for Dan today? Appreciate your insights that you put forward. This is a very lively topic of conversation and interest in the region as to how we're going to go about some of the stuff we're talking about as far as kind of remaking the transit system. And it's good conversation. I know out here in my town, Fermilab, we've got an expansion of the Fermi National Accelerator Laboratory that's now underway that they tell us at the end of the day in another 3 or 4 years, it's going to add about 1,800 new jobs out here to this facility. So that'll be an interesting one to see how we move all those people in and out of there, if that's what we're going to do. So very timely conversation. Anybody have any further comments?
Jeff, I just have one question.
Sure.
The most commonly used pronoun that Daniel used in his presentation was we. Who is we?
I think in this case, we're talking about all of the various state, county, municipal, regional officials that are involved in this Mobility Recovery Steering Committee. So thinking about the region as a whole, that we're talking about problems that have affected the entire region and the entire nation and world, but we're focusing on the impacts to the 7-county region. Those obviously differ between communities, and the challenges faced by the loop are quite different than the challenges faced by other parts of the region. But so we've tried to identify a series of policies and strategies that different pieces of them might speak to different areas of the region, but collectively that they can speak to the challenges that are being faced.
So this is one large committee. You guys get together in a room or on a Zoom meeting and bat this stuff around. Is that how you're doing it, or how's it taking place? I'm trying to understand the process here.
Yes. So there's a steering committee for the group that meets, not super regularly, but it's met every few months over the course of this work, and we have another one of those coming up shortly. And we've also had smaller discussions with individuals that are participating in that, or just in general throughout the region. We've also presented this work to CNAP's board and to various committees over the over the course of the project. And so that's been another avenue through which we've gotten engagement.
Thank you.
All right,
Yep.
well, we'll look forward to continuing to have conversation with you, Dan, in the days coming ahead.
Yeah, and I do have a few other points that I can talk about, Jared. I don't know how we are on timing.
Yeah, I think we're probably starting to get a little, I got some more agenda here I got to take care of. So maybe you have some real important thing you want to share with us?
I think maybe the only other thing that I would want to highlight is the next slide, and then we can wrap up, which is some that I think will be quite relevant to the mayors in this group. Because what we're also thinking about beyond the transit system is the more localized impacts on where, when, and how people are traveling throughout the region. And this is true with respect to people's work trips, but it's also true with people that are telecommuting. They're now working in their homes. Maybe they're taking daytime trips from places that they would not have been doing that before. And so thinking about, what we need to plan for in response to those changes in travel patterns. And so if you go to the next slide, we've identified a number of potential recommendations here as well that I think really relate to the local level, thinking about local streets and sidewalks and bike infrastructure, and thinking about what kinds of investments that we can make to ensure that safe and active and sustainable modes are realistic options throughout the day, throughout the region. And so this is really explicitly focusing, not just on our region's transit network, but on all of the different travel options that exist throughout the region, even in communities that don't have, reliable access to transit. And so we've identified some recommendations related to the infrastructure that supports those trips, thinking about both shorter term investments in the sorts of pop-up traffic calming shared streets that we saw during the pandemic, but also the longer term investments in infrastructure that helps to guide travelers to make decisions about things like speeding that are ultimately safer for everyone on the facility, including the driver and people who are outside of a car. We're also thinking about the kinds of investments that we might make as a region in supporting all-day travel, and especially thinking about how we could support Metra as it's begun to discuss the idea of moving toward a regional rail model where it focuses not as heavily on only serving morning and evening peak trips, but thinking about how it can better serve trips during the midday and evening, so that it becomes a realistic option for all kinds of trips and not just the work trips that it predominantly serves today. And then the last area, thinking about development patterns, because these safe and active and sustainable modes aren't realistic if you don't have places to go in close enough proximity. And so something that we're thinking about is, for example, we have Metro parking lots that may now see significantly less usage than they did before the pandemic. And so are there opportunities to think about partial redevelopments of some of those parking lots as new kinds of developments? We also have office parks and malls throughout the region that have seen challenges and shifts. And we see main streets that have been the focus of developments in communities throughout the region for decades. And how can we work to ensure that those areas continue to see activity, development, especially those that are in proximity to the rail transit assets that we've spent more than a century investing in. So we're trying to identify, sort of both one-off and systemic changes that we could make to support those kinds of developments and shifts, so that we're sort of rebuilding the transit ridership base in some parts of the region, and also continuing to support people who want to walk or bike or roll throughout the region, whether they're in a downtown Chicago or in any of the many communities throughout the region. So we do have other recommendations, but if we're running short on time, I can skip past them. We've identified some changes related to freight and e-commerce and employer actions, thinking about transportation demand management and employer efforts to reduce single occupant vehicle commutes. If you have any thoughts or feedback on any of this, we would welcome that after the meeting. I think if you go to the last slide, you'll see my email along with my colleague, Elizabeth Scott, who is the program manager for this work. And if you have thoughts or comments or reactions, we'd be happy to set up a follow-up conversation.
Thank you. Appreciate it. I'm sure this conversation will continue in meetings ahead.
Thank you all.
Okay, let's go to 3.5, which is a regional greenhouse gas emissions inventory. And Jared Payton is here and going to walk us through CMAP's recent greenhouse gas emissions inventory. Jared?
All right, hello everyone and good morning. As many of you know, I'm a staff liaison for the Council of Mayors Executive Committee, but for the next 10 minutes or so, I'm going to be changing hats and instead talking about the work that I've been doing as part of CMAP's climate team. And specifically, I'm going to be talking about the regional greenhouse gas emissions inventory and the related local emission summaries, which I think are going to be particularly relevant to the members of this committee. Before I get started, I do want to make a quick note about the timeline of this project, and I apologize for not having a slide for this. We just wrapped up work on the inventory, but we have not yet published the report. And that's because we're currently working on our media strategy plan. And also, as I'll explain later in the presentation, there are a lot of files associated with this project, and we want to make sure that they're presented on the website in a way that is user-friendly. So there's a lot of room for it getting pretty complicated. So everything that you'll be seeing is considered final, but it hasn't yet been published. That said, it's not a huge secret. So if you see anything that you're interested in, you want to take a look at the data, please reach out to me and I'm happy to share that on a one-on-one basis. And hopefully we'll be able to get all of the results out in the next month. So with that, we can go ahead and get started. And I want to begin with a quick note about the background of this project and why we're doing this work. So Onto 2050 has the goal of creating a region prepared for climate change, which really has two main components. The first is to intensify climate mitigation efforts, which is what we're talking about here. That really means reducing greenhouse gas emissions. And the second is to prepare or to increase our resilience to natural hazards like floods and extreme heat. So with this project, again, we have this goal of reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Onto 2050 sets a target of 80% reduction relative to 2005 levels by 2050. If you're going to have a target, you have to track your progress towards the target. And that's what we're really hoping to do. This is the third time that CMAP has conducted a regional greenhouse gas emissions inventory. The first was for 2010, the second was for 2015. So we're on a roughly 5-year update cycle, but we did decide to do this inventory for 2019 rather than 2020. And that's really due to the pandemic and the stay-at-home orders that really drastically changed the way people were moving about the region and where emissions were being generated. And we really want this inventory to be something that can guide our long-term policy making. So we decided 2019 was a little bit more of a representative year, which means we're not capturing things that happened during the pandemic. This is really a snapshot of where things were just before the pandemic. And then our next update, which will likely come in a couple of years, will show where things are today. So just keep that in mind as you're looking through these data. 2019 is the year we're talking about. So what's included in the inventory? This is really intended to be a comprehensive assessment of where emissions are coming from in the region. So it includes really everything: transportation, stationary energy, waste, and wastewater. Those are the three main buckets that we're looking at. So in a moment, I'll walk through each of those buckets and really explain everything that goes into it. But the thing to keep in mind is that this is looking at everything. It's not just public sector emissions. It's also looking at private homes and businesses, private vehicles. We really try to keep this pretty comprehensive. We are providing the data as a full inventory for every county in the region, all 7 counties, as well as the city of Chicago. And in most of our comparisons, we actually split Cook County into 2 jurisdictions, one being the city of Chicago, the other being suburban Cook County, which provides a little bit more nuance in comparing some of the numbers. We have in the past only provided county level data. That's because it takes a lot of work to provide local level inventories. But we heard feedback that for most local level leaders and staff members, it's hard to see how the actions that you're taking contribute to a county with 1 million or 2 million people. So this time around, while we're not providing full inventories at the local level, we are providing a lot of data, all of the data that we could provide. And it's something that I'm really excited about and I'll be talking about at the end of this presentation. So With that said, let's just get into the results of the inventory. The big finding is that the region in 2019 generated 112 million metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. I suspect that number doesn't mean a whole lot to folks on this call. It's kind of an abstract thing to think about, but it is helpful because you can make comparisons as to how that number is changing over time. So that number represents a 9% reduction since 2010 and a 2% reduction since 2015. So the region is headed in the right direction, which is good to see, but we're not at the pace we would like to see. And this is another thing I'll come back to at the end of the presentation, but to reach that 80% target that CMAP is shooting for, we would need to see a 5% reduction every single year. So that's quite a big increase from where we are today. On the right side of your screen, you can see how those emissions fall into those three buckets that I outlined. The biggest piece of the pie here is stationary energy. That's emissions from buildings, either in the form of electricity or natural gas for heating and cooking. That's almost 2/3 of our emissions. Transportation is the next biggest piece of the pie. That's almost 1/3. And finally, waste is the smallest share of our region's emissions at about 3%. And I'm now going to walk you through each one of these and let you know exactly what is going into these totals. So beginning with the biggest share of our emissions, stationary energy. Again, this is really talking about buildings. It's 65% of our total emissions. Since 2010, we've seen an 11% reduction in emissions from buildings. That's great. This is by far the biggest source of our region's greenhouse gas emissions reductions. And I really should highlight that all of those savings are coming from electricity. And those savings are from switching fuels away from coal to cleaner sources like wind, solar, natural gas, and continued use of nuclear energy. During this period, we saw consumption of electricity and natural gas both increase, but electricity was getting so much cleaner that emissions still went down. I think one trend that's worth pointing out is the chart you see on the right side here. In 2010, the region had a lot more emissions coming from electricity than natural gas, but as of 19, they had almost leveled off because electricity was getting cleaner while natural gas was staying more or less the same. The next bucket I want to talk about here is transportation. This is 32% of our emissions, and this is a really important one for CMAP and for this committee because obviously transportation is what we do here. And this sector is a little bit less rosy than some of the other ones. Since 2010, our emissions have actually increased in transportation, and that's mostly due to people driving more. Our vehicles have gotten more efficient over the last 9 years, but if you have more people driving, even if they're more efficient vehicles, you still see emissions going up. And this is a place that is really worth highlighting that we're not even accounting for the changes that we saw during the pandemic. And this really is a good follow-up to Daniel's presentation, where what happens in our transportation sector really affects a whole range of things, including sustainability, including the economy. So it really highlights the importance of that work. When we look at where emissions are coming from within the transportation sector, we really see that it's driven by on-road emissions. So that's public and private cars, buses, and trucks. It's 83% of all of our transportation emissions. The next biggest piece of this sector is off-road transportation, and that's referring to all vehicles that are not used for driving on roads. So that's everything from construction equipment to lawn mowers and other types of vehicles that are used to move things around, not on a road. Aviation is the next biggest piece of the pie here. That includes takeoffs and landings from Midway and O'Hare, as well as operation in those airports only. So that does not include municipal airports. And then finally, railways is just 2% of the transportation emissions. They're pretty efficient, even if they do have a big impact locally on air quality in some cases. And then the final piece of the pie, and I won't spend as much time on this one, waste and wastewater is just 3% of all of our emissions. And this is another area where we've seen continued reductions over the years. And this is really due to a pretty widespread adoption of more efficient technologies in wastewater treatment, and especially methane capture at landfills. We've also seen increased composting in recent years, which helps to prevent waste from going to landfills and is a net positive for emissions. The chart that you're looking at here breaks things down by jurisdiction, and as you might suspect, there's quite a bit of variability within the region. When you break out the city of Chicago and suburban Cook County as two separate jurisdictions, we actually see that suburban Cook County is the single biggest emitter of greenhouse gas emissions in absolute terms, followed by the city of Chicago, while Kendall County produces the fewest. But one trend that I think is, or one indicator that I think is really worth highlighting is the per capita emissions rates. And that's what you're seeing with the dots on this chart. And here the city of Chicago really shines as being the most efficient jurisdiction, followed by Cook County and Kendall County. Will County is the outlier on the other side. They produce the most emissions per person, and that's a trend that we also saw in our 2015 inventory as well. This is the final slide that I have for the regional level results, and it's really showing where we've been over time and where we possibly could be headed. The three numbers that you see on the left side of this chart are 2010, 2015, and 2019 numbers. And then the three lines coming out of that are three different business as usual projections. And I want to highlight, these are not complex forecasts that are looking at things like EV adoption rates or anything like that. It's just looking at where we are for per capita emissions today and have been in the past, and what could happen with CMAP's population forecasts. So the first scenario shows what would happen if our per capita emissions stayed exactly where they are today as our population changed according to CMAP's forecast. That would result in an increase in emissions. The second scenario shows what would happen if we saw the same reduction from 2015 to 2019 every 5 years through 2050, and that would result in a pretty much flat emissions. The third scenario shows what would happen if our emissions changed the same way they did between 2010 and 2019 every 10 years, and that results in a small decrease in emissions. But the really big takeaway here is that dotted line on the bottom, the climate stabilization goal. That's CMAP's 80% reduction target. That's in line with the Paris Agreement. And it really does, this chart does a good job of highlighting the magnitude of change that's needed to get there. So the final thing that I want to highlight this evening, or this morning rather, getting ahead of myself, this morning is the local emissions summaries. And this is something that I'm very excited about. For this project, we have taken as much data as possible and broken it down for every municipality in the region and every Chicago community area. So we have 300 and some of these 2-page reports that highlight most of the major sources of emissions for a community. So that's natural gas, electricity, on-road transportation, and waste, as well as related indicators that show what might be driving those emissions. So for transportation, for example, we're showing how people are commuting, whether it's by walking, transit, or driving. We're showing how many electric vehicles are registered in a community, how many electric vehicle charger stations there are, what transit access looks like. And the idea for this chart is really, or of this product, is to provide this data to local decision makers, sustainability commissions, really to everyone, so that they can get started making sustainability plans and climate action plans without having to do that first step of paying a consultant several $1,000s to create an inventory. Some communities will still be interested in doing that and producing the kind of gold standard emissions inventory that people like to have, but most communities don't necessarily need that to get started. So we're really trying to make this work easier for local implementers such as yourselves. Okay, finally, next steps. I mentioned previously that we'll be publishing this work later this summer, hopefully within the next month. And when we do that, we're going to be having a big outreach campaign. And that's because this is the kind of product that can be really helpful, but only if people know it exists. So if you're interested in having someone from CMAP come out and share this work with your board, with the Sustainability Commission, with the community group, please let us know. We'd be happy to do that. I'll also be emailing all of you directly to make sure that you have access to this information. We'll also be working internally with this data to continue working towards that ON2 2050 goal of intensifying our climate mitigation efforts. And then eventually we will update the inventory and see how these trends have continued to progress over the course of the pandemic. And that's everything that I have this morning. I'm happy to answer any questions now or over email. I know we don't have a ton of time this morning, but thanks for listening.
Thank you, Jared. Does anybody have any quick questions? Okay, well, thank you. We're going to go then to 3.6, which is the local government network update, and Lily Brock is on here to do this. Lily?
Thank you, Mayor. I will make this pretty quick. So last quarter, we completed our 13th initiative for the local government network, where we solicited interest in future safety planning technical assistance. And we also gave communities a heads up about IDOT's HSIP. So that included sharing a contact to IDOT if the community had any questions about their application that they were thinking about submitting. And last quarter, we also collaborated with the Illinois DCO to share our regional contact database with them for them to improve their CRM. And I think that just goes to show that we've really been able to use our LGN contact database to help a lot of partners with these contacts that we have. So I thought that was really exciting. And then next quarter, we're planning to make communities aware of some upcoming CMAP initiatives. So the call for projects, that's going to be one of them that is anticipated to happen in the fall. So we'll be reaching out to communities and making them aware of that and putting them in touch with our subject matter experts here at CMAP to make sure that they can talk about what type of assistance might be best for them to apply for, or if they have any questions about the call, we can put them in touch with someone who can answer those questions. And then we are also going to be promoting our municipal survey. So that will be happening sometime in the fall as well. And so our liaisons will provide assistance to communities if they need help filling that out or if they have any questions. And so with all of those exciting initiatives happening in the fall, we're going to continue to ramp up our outreach efforts for the local government network and just try to better connect our liaisons with their communities. Perhaps we'll even do some in-person outreach. So have our liaisons go to their communities in person and, you know, for example, help them fill out the municipal survey, bring them their community data snapshots, stuff like that. So there's a lot of exciting stuff coming up in the fall, and we're hoping to really leverage the local government network to make sure that communities are aware. So with that, that concludes my update. Does anyone have any questions?
Any questions of Lily? Thank you. It's an exciting chapter that you're writing here at CMAP, and we'll look forward to hearing more detailed about it in the meetings ahead. So thank you for your efforts.
Thank you.
Okay, let's go to 3.7, which is going to be the legislative update. And John Carpenter, the Director of Intergovernmental Affairs, is with us. And we are now going to turn things over to him, and we're going to be introduced to two new members on the Legislative Affairs team. So John?
Good morning. Yes, briefly, the legislative staff here is preparing the 2023 legislative agenda. We hope to finalize it sometime in the fall. We are looking to fund several initiatives and trying to pursue objectives that are laid out in on to 2050 that need legislative solutions.
Okay, did you have a couple of people that you've added to your staff that we wanted to learn their names of?
Well, there are four of us in the Intergovernmental Affairs Department, Kasha Hart, Tim McMahon, and Tricia Hyland, and we are getting started on planning the agenda for the upcoming legislative session and waiting for the outcome of the election to determine the meetings we'll be having sometime starting in November.
Yeah, there's a lot of people waiting for the election to happen to see what the results of that are going to be, because a lot of things have changed, a lot of boundaries and districts have been reformed, and there's a lot of stuff that's taken place. So it's going to be a kind of a whole new day in Washington and Springfield, I think.
That's right. We're prepared.
It's good to have you guys there and ready to go, because I think at a future meeting, we may want to spend some time just having an open conversation amongst the mayors about what should be the legislative priorities of our organization, because I think
we will be doing that. We're creating an outline right now, and then we'll be circulating it and opening it up for discussion and looking for initiatives.
Right. So we'll be looking forward to having more conversations with you in the days ahead.
Great. Same here.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, moving to 4.0, do we have any other business? Says the committee members joining the meeting late should verbally make themselves known or send an email to transportation@cmap.illinois.gov so that your attendance can be recorded. Do we have any other late breaking thoughts or ideas or questions? We try to get this meeting generally over with by 11 o'clock and we're 6 minutes away. So we've done a pretty good job. We really have covered a wide variety of subjects this morning. And specifically, I appreciate how well the CMAP staff had everything kind of put together here to share with us, because we have had a good selection of mayors on the call this morning. So no other public comments. I guess I'm instructed here by my little outline that they give me to say if there's no other public comment, the next Council of Mayors meeting shall be on September 13th, 2022. And I guess I'm also supposed to ask, did we have anybody read any comments that was sent to the CMAP that they wanted to put in the chat box?
We don't have any comments from the public.
Okay.
The legislative staff did say that they're looking forward to working with all of you. And if you guys have any legislative affairs questions, they can help you, and don't hesitate to reach out to them, specifically Kasha Hart, who is new on our staff. And if you want to reach out to anybody, you can always let any of the Council of Mayors team know, and we'll put you in touch, and your PLs can also put you in touch with anybody you need to reach out to.
Hey, Terry,
Yes.
Mike Einhorn, could you do me a favor and call me when you
Yes.
get done with this?
Yes,
Call
I
my
will.
cell. All right.
Okay.
Okay, any final late items of business or comments anybody wants to make? Again,
Mayor Shilkey, this is Mayor Warner. I noticed on the agenda you guys printed out that the next meeting is scheduled for September 19th, but this slide says September 13th.
well, thanks for raising that question. The staff, what are we doing? Is it the 19th or the 13th?
I'm looking at the calendar now. It is both the 13th.
It is the 3rd. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you, Mayor.
Sorry about that.
Thank you, President Warner, for bringing that up. I see what you're talking about, so thank you. Any other comments or questions? If there's no other public comment, again, the next Council of Mayors Executive Committee will be on September 13th, 2022. If there is no other business before the committee, I'm adjourning the meeting, and I look forward to seeing you all in September. So I'll adjourn the meeting, and thank you very much.
Have a good day, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.